Imagine a truth so profound, it was erased from the pages of Scripture. Not because it was false, but because it was too dangerous to be known. The Book of Enoch, a text older than the Bible itself, whispers of a time before Eden, before the serpent, before the world we know. It speaks of angels who fell, of giants who walked the earth, and of a man who saw the heavens unfold before his eyes. Picture a mountain shrouded in mist, where celestial beings made a forbidden pact that changed the course of humanity forever. What if the story you've been told is only half the truth? If this hidden chapter stirs something within you, stay with us until the end, because a revelation is waiting. Like, share, and subscribe to uncover the secrets they didn't want you to know. What if the story of humanity begins not in a garden, but in a realm where light and shadow dance on the edge of eternity? The Book of Enoch unveils a chapter older than Genesis, older than the serpent's whisper, older than the earth itself. Before the world took shape, before the stars found their place, there were the Watchers, celestial beings sent not to govern but to observe. Picture them, their eyes like lanterns piercing the primordial dark, gazing upon a humanity still finding its breath. They stood at the boundary of the seen and unseen, tasked with a sacred duty. But something stirred within them. Desire, forbidden and fierce, began to unravel the divine order. Have you ever wondered what could tempt an angel to risk eternity? This isn't myth. It's testimony. The Book of Enoch, though buried for centuries, reads like the words of a man who saw too much. Its pages tremble with urgency, as if the scribe feared the truth might slip away. This text, banned from the Bible, wasn't cast aside for being false, but for revealing too much. Secrets that challenge the story we've been told. Why would a truth so ancient, so profound, be hidden? Imagine a scroll sealed not by chains, but by silence, its words waiting to be rediscovered. As we step into this forgotten narrative, it's like opening a door to a world before our own. A world where angels walked among us, and the fate of creation hung in the balance. What lies beyond that door? Let's cross the threshold together, into a story that changes everything we thought we knew. The air on Mount Hermon hung heavy with mist, as if the earth itself sensed what was coming. Here, the Watchers, those celestial guardians sent to observe humanity, made a choice that would shatter the divine order. They were beings of light, not men, not gods, but angels who gazed upon the daughters of men and saw beauty too radiant to resist. Their duty was to watch, not to want, yet desire burned brighter than their sacred charge. In a silent pact, sworn in the shadows of that ancient peak, they rebelled. They descended, took human wives, and crossed a line no angel was meant to cross. Can you feel the weight of that moment? A celestial vow that broke the heavens? The Book of Enoch names this act, unflinching in its detail. Genesis whispers of it. The sons of God saw the daughters of men and took wives for themselves. But Enoch lays bare the rebellion's heart. This was no mere union. It was a defiance that birthed the Nephilim, giants, hybrids of spirit and flesh, towering over a trembling world. Their birth wasn't a blessing, but a fracture, a tear in the fabric of creation. The Watcher's choice wasn't just a fall, it was a plunge into chaos, setting loose consequences that would ripple through time. What could drive such beings to risk eternity for the fleeting? As the mountain's mist clears, a darker truth emerges, one of forbidden offspring and a world on the brink. Step closer now, for the story grows wilder, and the earth begins to groan under the weight of what came next. The Nephilim strode across the earth, giants born of forbidden unions, their shadows swallowing the light of a fragile world. The Watchers, those fallen angels, didn't stop at breaking heaven's law with human wives. They unleashed secrets meant to stay locked in eternity. They taught humanity to forge metals, but not for plows, for swords, sharp and merciless. They mapped the stars' paths, but twisted that wisdom into sorcery, dark and seductive. Imagine handing a child a flame, beautiful, warm, but ready to burn everything down. That's what their knowledge was, power humanity wasn't ready to wield. Does it sound familiar? Like giving our world a technology too vast for our hearts to hold? The Book of Enoch lays this bare, naming the Watcher's gifts as a curse in disguise. The Nephilim, these hybrids of spirit and flesh, weren't just giants. They were a corruption that seeped into the earth's bones. Their hunger devoured crops, their presence tainted bloodlines, their existence warped creation's design. Enoch suggests something startling. Evil didn't spark in human hearts, but in the rebellion of those from above. Their sins spread like wildfire, not just in bodies, but in the very essence of life, its lineage, its spirit. Pause and think. If evil began beyond us, what does that mean for the shadows we wrestle with today? The world groaned, its harmony shattered, its purity stained. As the flames of corruption rose, heaven watched in silence. But not for long. A reckoning was coming, vast and unstoppable, to cleanse what had been broken. Step into that storm with us, for the earth's cry demands an answer. The earth shuddered under the Nephilim's weight, its rivers choked, its fields stripped bare. Creation, once a symphony of divine design, had become a cacophony of corruption. The Watchers' rebellion and their giant offspring didn't just break laws, they fractured the very essence of life, tainting bloodlines, twisting humanity's core. Why would God drown a world he crafted with care? The Book of Enoch reveals a truth deeper than human sin alone. The flood wasn't just punishment. It was a reset, a desperate act to save what remained pure. Noah, called blameless in his generation, in Genesis, stood apart, not just for his faith, but because his lineage escaped the Nephilim's stain. Imagine a single thread, untainted, woven through a tapestry of chaos. Noah's family was that thread, carrying humanity's original design across the waters. The ark wasn't just wood and pitch, it was a vessel of hope, preserving a spark for a reborn world. Enoch's account forces us to pause. What does it mean to reset creation? In our world, where chaos often feels familiar, could we be chasing purity in our own way, through laws, ideals, or revolutions? The flood washed away more than cities. It cleansed a corruption that threatened existence itself. As the waters rose, heaven's gaze turned to one man, not yet named, who would see beyond the deluge. His story, like a beacon through the storm, calls us to look upward. Step into that light now, for the man who walked with God is about to unveil secrets no flood could erase. Through the storm of the flood, one man stood apart, Enoch, a figure cloaked in mystery, whose story burns like a star in the dark. Genesis says simply, Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. But the Book of Enoch unveils what lies behind those words. He didn't just walk with the divine, he was lifted into heavens unseen, shown visions that would shake the soul. He saw thrones of glory blazing with light, angels falling like embers from the sky, and gateways where worlds touch. His words don't sing like poetry. They strike like the testimony of a man who saw eternity and lived to tell it. Could you bear the weight of such sights, knowing the world would never be the same. Enoch's visions weren't dreams. They were revelations of a cosmic order, of judgment awaiting the rebellious watchers, and of a destiny for the righteous. He saw the universe's architecture, its spiritual scaffolding, long before science dreamed of such things. Why do we rarely speak of a man who came closer to God than any other without dying? His journey challenges us. What might faith unlock if we walked as he did? As the heavens closed behind him, Enoch left a record that refused to fade, a beacon calling us to see beyond the veil. Follow that light now, for the world tried to bury his words, and the silence speaks louder than we know. Enoch's words, once cherished, became a secret too dangerous to keep. The Book of Enoch was read by Jews, studied by early Christians, even quoted in Scripture. Jude writes, "Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesied. Yet when men shaped the Bible's canon, Enoch was cast out. Some called it too symbolic, others too unsettling. But what if it was too true? Its revelations of angelic rebellion, cosmic gateways, and evil's celestial roots threatened empires built on control. Why silence a text that Scripture itself echoes? Imagine a truth so potent it was locked away, not by chains, but by the choices of councils who feared its power. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church never forgot Enoch, holding it sacred while the West buried it under centuries of silence. Dead Sea Scrolls later whispered its fragments, proving it was never truly lost. But why hide a book that completes the Bible's story? In our world, where truth is often shaped by those in power, could Enoch's erasure reflect a deeper agenda? The Vatican guards manuscripts older than empires, yet Enoch remains a whisper. Was it banned to keep us from asking questions that unravel the comfortable? As the veil of silence tears, Enoch's voice rises again, urging us to seek what was hidden. Step into that challenge, for his words point to a war not yet won, a war for the truth itself. Enoch's gaze pierced beyond the heavens, into the spiral of time itself. His book doesn't just recount the past. It maps the future, unveiling 7 eras, each a coil in history's winding path. These cycles, marked by crises, judgments, and renewal, pulse with a rhythm that feels strangely alive. Enoch saw thrones prepared, a Messiah who would judge the mighty, and an earth purified by justice. His words echo the Book of Revelation, as if he and John stood on the same eternal summit, seeing the same truth through different eyes. Does the chaos of our world, its unrest, its searching, feel like a shadow of one of those cycles? Imagine time not as a line, but as a spiral, repeating yet evolving, each turn bringing us closer to a final reckoning. Enoch's prophecy speaks of fallen angels bound, of righteousness restored, of a day when the earth breathes free. Could we be living in one of those eras now, unaware of the cosmic clock ticking above us? In a world where division and uncertainty reign, his visions feel less like ancient tales and more like a mirror reflecting our own struggles. What if the restlessness you feel is an echo of that ancient breach, a call to look beyond the surface? As Enoch's words rise from the silence, they challenge us to see time's deeper rhythm. Step into that spiral now, for his prophecy points to a truth that still unfolds, waiting for those brave enough to see it. Even silenced, Enoch's voice could not be erased. His footprints linger in the Bible's pages, subtle yet undeniable. The Book of Jude quotes him directly. Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesied. Peter speaks of angels cast into chains of darkness, a mystery Enoch's words unravel. Why does Scripture itself nod to a book it left behind? The Ethiopian Orthodox Church never abandoned Enoch, holding it sacred while the West shrouded it in centuries of silence. Fragments found in the Dead Sea Scrolls whisper its survival, as if truth refused to stay buried. But why guard a text if it's only myth? The Vatican's ancient manuscripts, older than empires, hold Enoch's words, catalogued yet rarely spoken. If it's truth, why hide it from those who seek it? Enoch doesn't rival the Bible. It completes it, filling gaps we didn't know were there. It's as if Scripture murmurs, "Look deeper. The story isn't finished." In our world, where truth is often obscured by noise, Enoch's persistence feels like a rebellion against silence. Could his words be resurfacing now because the time is right? His account of cosmic battles and hidden gateways challenges us to question what we've been told. As his voice breaks through, it's a call to seek the missing pieces. Walk toward that truth now, for Enoch's story isn't just history. It's a map to a war still being fought. A war for the soul of what it means to be human. Enoch's story is no relic of the past. It's a battle cry echoing through time. The Watcher's rebellion, the Nephilim's corruption, the flood's cleansing, all reveal a spiritual war that began before humanity and rages still. The Book of Enoch unveils this conflict, not with swords or fire, but with questions that cut deeper. What is the truth we've been denied? Could the unrest in our souls, the chaos of our world, trace back to that ancient breach when angels defied heaven? Enoch's words suggest we carry echoes of that distortion, a restlessness that whispers of a greater story. In a world drowning in noise, his account is a lifeline, urging us to seek what lies beneath the surface. This war for truth isn't fought in distant heavens, but within us. Every choice to question, to seek, to awaken is a step toward victory. Enoch didn't just see cosmic battles, he saw our potential to rise above them. What if his revelations are resurfacing now because the time has come to remember? His book is a key, unlocking doors to a reality we've been taught to ignore. As the world spins faster, pulling us into its spiral, Enoch's voice calls us to pause, to look upward, to fight for the truth that sets us free. Dare we answer that call? The battle isn't over. It's yours to join. Step into that fight now, for the truth Enoch carried is a flame that still burns, waiting for those bold enough to claim it. The Book of Enoch isn't just a forgotten text. It's a mirror reflecting a truth we've always sensed, but never named. Its story of fallen angels, corrupted creation, and a man who walked with God challenges everything we thought we knew. What will you do with this truth? Will you let it fade, or will you chase the light it reveals? In a world that buries its secrets, Enoch's voice is a call to awaken, to question, to see the spiritual war shaping our reality. If his words stir something within you, don't let them pass. Share a question this story sparked in your heart, like this video, or subscribe to uncover more hidden truths. Stay with us, for the journey doesn't end here. A promise of revelation awaits those who seek. Take that step today, and let the truth set you free.